Hi, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of shakuhachi, comparing especially modern shakuhachi to Edo-style shakuhachi. And from the outset, when I say that, that's difficult to do because there's actually quite a bit of variety both in modern shakuhachi and Edo shakuhachi. And there's also the problems that we don't have a whole lot of Edo shakuhachi that are left to see. Some of the ones that are left have been modified to be more like modern instruments and therefore kind of wrecked. Other ones just haven't been preserved because they weren't made by anybody special. So there's a lot of guesswork involved in terms of figuring out exactly what people were playing. But at the end of the day, whether it's of old or at present, the main idea between looking at older shakuhachi and other shakuhachi is just to find out what you like. That's what this has been for me, is a quest to find a shakuhachi that's just right for me, that plays shakuhachi in the way that I want to play it. And that's the kind of shakuhachi that I make. But anyway, so I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've found in terms of differences. This is an example of a modern shakuhachi, a modern jiari shakuhachi. You can take it apart into two pieces. I don't know how good you're going to see this. Maybe you can tell a little bit on the video, but there you go. It's very smooth inside. Very, very smooth. The reason for that is that the natural bamboo bore is not employed at all in this shakuhachi. What we do is take ji, which is a mixture of urushi, which is a sap that kind of dries and hardens. It's got urushi, water, and tonoko, and maybe some other things depending on the maker. Everybody's got their own special formula. But when you mix those things together, it kind of makes a mud. And you spread that mud inside the shakuhachi, you layer it on, you let it dry for a long time, and you use special tools to polish it and shape the bore into a very particular shape. And that shape produces something that is musically correct, because modern shakuhachi are mainly musical instruments. Also very much influenced by Western music. Some are made instead of with 5 holes, some have 7 holes, lately some have 6 holes as well, and they're used to play pop music or jazz and other things. And they're also used to play together with other instruments. And again, when these started to be made, the invention of the microphone was not really around so much yet. So people started performing with shakuhachi and other instruments together, even other Japanese instruments like the shamisen or the koto. And the shakuhachi wasn't loud enough to play with them, so they were thinking, I want something that makes a little bit of a louder sound. So you see modern shakuhachi have a lot of volume, and their tone color is very uniform, right? Because everything is made to be perfectly balanced so that the tones match, and you play them with your fingers. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. All right, so you get a very clear, uniform sound out of those. You also notice that for most modern shakuhachi, the octaves are going to match up. I have to make some effort not to adjust myself to the shakuhachi, but if I play straight, now in that, you'll even notice, I don't know if you noticed it, but the highest note in the lower octave was actually a little bit low. There's an interesting reason for that, and I might as well just explain that to you. In older shakuhachi, I'll show you now, this is, let's see, this one will give you a good example, won't it? This is the shakuhachi that I made in the old style. And I'm just going to play that for you to compare. Here, the upper notes in the lower octave are very low. That's not a problem. That's actually how all the older shakuhachi are. You play them by adjusting yourself to them, which is something that you end up doing unconsciously once you've played a little bit. It's something that's effortless and you do unconsciously. This is the kind of shakuhachi that everybody was used to playing. I think a lot of people didn't even realize that they were doing that unconsciously, so that a lot of makers, even today, have artifacts of the old playing style in their modern shakuhachi. Right? You don't play it like that, though, right? You play it like this. They're used to it, making that adjustment, so they never really bothered to make it so that the bottom octave is perfectly in tune with the upper octave, because their body was used to playing that way. So when they're making it, it seems like it is in tune perfectly, because they don't realize that they're unconsciously adapting themselves to their shakuhachi. It's something that everybody does to some extent, unless you have one of the $8,000, $9,000 top tier jiari modern instruments, which are in some cases tuned quite perfectly in that way. So, modern shakuhachi. I'll tell you some more differences between them and the Edo era shakuhachi. Generally speaking, hole sizes on modern shakuhachi are quite a bit bigger. The reason for that is that you're looking for volume, like I mentioned before. You'll also notice that the hole position is different, right? If you look closely on these, the distance between here is a bit greater than the distance between these two, right? This hole is lower, and then these two have a different distance between them again. Right? So all the holes have a different distance, and the reason for that is that modern shakuhachi are made and tuned so that you can play them just by moving your fingers. Right? The aim is really not to have to adjust your body to the flute at all, but to be able to quickly make precisely what note you want to make just by moving your fingers, not by adjusting your breath or your chin or anything else. In contrast, this is most likely an Edo era flute that I have. Some things you'll notice right away. The finger holes are quite a bit smaller. Right? The reason for that is that older shakuhachi aren't looking for volume so much as they are tone color. Right? The unique tone color that happens between the shifting air pressures and the way you have to change your breath and your body for each note give each note a particular tone color, and the smaller holes give the air more room to play around inside the shakuhachi. Right? You're not trying to make a lot of volume and get a lot of air out there at once. You kind of want the air to stay inside and play around in the shakuhachi so you can make those kind of interesting tone colors. Another difference is that you'll see each note has equal spacing. That's called towari spacing. Right? Each hole on the front is equally spaced. Part of the reason for that is that in older shakuhachi, they're not concerned with tuning. In fact, if you have a bamboo with a natural bamboo bore, you can't tune it perfectly. It's impossible because of the structure of the bamboo. So instead of tuning them perfectly, the aim is to make them comfortable to play. They're very comfortable to hold that way because all the holes are evenly spaced. It feels good, you know? And feeling good is especially important for something that you're going to use for meditation, right? You don't want something that's uncomfortable to hold. You also hear that it's quite a bit quieter. A much softer, rounder tone. Now again, there are examples of Edo-era shakuhachi with bigger finger holes, like some of the shakuhachi that were made up north here in Aomori were made from bamboo that's really thin-walled but also very wide bore. Here's an example just for comparison of a wider bore shakuhachi. wider bore shakuhachi necessitate that you make bigger finger holes. See, there's no getting around it. It won't make a sound without doing that because a greater volume of air has to escape. So you'll find some shakuhachi up north with bigger finger holes, but still, even those, in comparison with modern shakuhachi, the finger holes are a little bit on the smaller side. Just to give you a side-by-side comparison, here's two 1.8s. One is a modern one. By modern, I mean this one was made in the probably 1940s. This one was made in maybe the late 1700s or the early 1800s or something like that. Mid 1800s. You can see how the hole positions are a little bit different. Right? It's, again, without measuring it, it's a little bit hard to tell, but you can see how the third hole from the bottom on the shakuhachi, the modern shakuhachi, is a little bit lower. Now, this one, it's not so much different. They're, the end holes on older shakuhachi also tend to be a bit smaller. This one is an older modern shakuhachi, so it's actually still a rather small size. But some modern shakuhachi you'll see really open up the bottom quite a bit. This one is quite a bit more open. Right? See how it's kind of flared out at the bottom there? Almost like a trumpet. And again, that's because they're looking for volume more so than an interesting tone color. Not that their tone color can't be interesting, of course. Here's another example of an old style shakuhachi, right? This is probably this is more like Kyoto style. The Kyoto style shakuhachis are always very kind of thin, right? Very thin and delicate, little tiny, maybe 8mm finger holes on this one. Very tiny compared to modern standards. And so there you have it. The main differences are the finger hole sizes, the emphasis on tone color, right, in older shakuhachi rather than volume. And there's also one thing that goes along with that I'd like to show you. This is something I do on shakuhachi that I make as well, of course, because I make them in the older style that I'm describing to you. The cutout for the utaguchi is very low. You can see on this one, this Edo one, it's almost non-existent, right? Whereas, so, you know, for mine, for older shakuhachi, it's about 0.5 to 1mm, whereas newer ones go from 3 to 4mm. This is a Tozan style shakuhachi, and you can see how there's quite a deep cutout there. This is about 3mm. And again, the reason with a 3mm is you can really blow. You can put a lot of power into it and make a loud sound with lots of very clear, sharp harmonics. Older shakuhachi are not really for that, though. They're not for making a loud sound. They're for making an interesting sound with very little breath. Especially if you play really big or longer shakuhachi, which are really more of a modern thing, although they did exist in the Edo era. It's impossible to put a lot of breath into them. What you're doing is setting up a vibration and resonance here at the mouthpiece, and that's setting up a vibrating column of air. And that's what's making your sound. So really, it's not that you have to move so much air, you're just setting up the vibration. And you can do that with a very small amount of air. So the mouthpiece cutout is smaller. The idea is that you're breathing. You're not actually blowing into older shakuhachi. You're just breathing into them. And that's enough to make the sound, so that you should be able to have a nice in-breath, a little pause, and a long out-breath, just letting the air kind of leak out of your body in a confident and controlled manner, but not blowing. Still a strong sound, but not a loud sound. I don't know if it's going to be difficult for you to see, but I think you can make it out a little bit. The nodes inside are left on. Some older shakuhachi have the nodes almost filed clean out, but if you look at any of them, you'll always see that there's at least a little bit of the node left on there. Because that's how we tune them. That's how we balance the different air pressure chambers that are happening inside. Which, for another reason, for Edo-style shakuhachi, it's important that you have the nodes positioned right. If they're not, it makes them very hard to balance, right? You need to have a smaller chamber, then a slightly bigger one, and a slightly bigger one. If you don't have that flow and progression, it's very difficult to balance the sounds because you're using these nodes to balance them. Again, with more, sometimes some people will make shakuhachi with 8 nodes instead of 7, where the node will come here and here. And that's acceptable, right? A standard shakuhachi is 7 nodes. This one has 7. If you have 8 nodes, it's kind of like a haiku, right? You go 5, 7, 5, but you can actually have plus or minus 1 in the rules of haiku. So you can have 5, 6, 5 or 5, 8, 5 in terms of your syllables. Shakuhachi works like the middle stanza of a haiku. Can be 7, should be 7, but it can be 8, that can work, and it can be 6, that can work. But anything beyond that doesn't really work too well if you're trying to make something that makes all the sounds reliably. And for now, we'll leave it at that. Those are the major differences between modern and Edo-style shakuhachi. But I will add one more thing. In between there, you've got modern ji-nashi, okay? I should explain a little thing or two about that as well. I told you that modern shakuhachi have ji-ari, right? They have ji inside them. It's that mixture of urushi, water, and tonoko that you put in to make a sort of mud-like paste, and then they harden, and you polish them very smooth. Older shakuhachi don't have that at all. That's why we use just the nodes to tune them. And again, because of the natural shape of the shakuhachi, you can't tune them so that both of the octaves are perfectly in tune. You have to adjust yourself to the shakuhachi. That's the principle behind it. But again, this is not something that takes a lot of energy. Once you play it for a little while, you do it without thinking about it. If you have to think about it, it means that your shakuhachi was probably not tuned enough, right? In between those, you have modern ji-nashi. Okay, so modern ji-nashi shakuhachi don't use ji like the modern one that I showed you. But modern ji-nashi are made basically by people who are used to playing jiari shakuhachi, but want the jinashi sound, and yet a modern shakuhachi. So what does that mean? It means that you're going for volume, for one thing. So the nodes are pretty much taken clean out, and the bamboo is actually, a lot of times the bamboo is kind of cut away, especially at the top, because you have to widen the top if you want the octaves to start to match at all. So a lot of people will widen up the top part of the shakuhachi on the inside so that the natural shape of the bore is lost to some extent. Lots of people will add some ji or something in some places to tune the shakuhachi, again, similar to a modern ji-ari shakuhachi. Another difference with this one you can see, this is a modern ji-nashi. The distance here is greater than the distance here, which is smaller than the distance here, right? So these are to some extent trying to be in tune with a Western musical scale. The other thing you can hear is this has a lot of volume compared to the other ones. Why? Because the finger holes are big and the end hole is big. Bigger holes, bigger end holes give precedence to volume rather than tone color. So you have more of a ji-ari sound, but with some of that kind of natural ji-nashi feeling in a modern ji-nashi instrument. What I go for is the more Edo-style sound, something quieter, smaller finger holes, smaller end holes, nodes left in, shallow cutout at the mouthpiece, so that it gives you something that emphasizes tone color rather than volume, because that's what I like. What do you like?